If you're reading these words right now, something in your field already knows what I'm about to reveal. Not your thinking mind, which is probably skeptical, analyzing, preparing to dismiss this as another spiritual concept. I'm talking about the part of you that exists beyond thought, beyond belief, beyond the dense physical form you've been taught to identify as yourself. That part of you has been waiting for this recognition. And the fact that your awareness landed here, in this exact moment, out of infinite possible moments, means you're ready to remember something you've always known, but have been conditioned to forget. You are not the body reading these words. You are the energy animating it. Let that statement sit for a moment. Don't rush to understand it intellectually. Feel into it. Notice what happens in your system when you consider the possibility that everything you've been taught about your fundamental nature might be backwards. The density delusion. From the moment you were born, you've been taught to identify with matter, your name attached to a body, your story, constructed from memories stored in neural patterns, your identity, built from the roles you play, the relationships you maintain, the possessions you accumulate. Look around right now. Everything you see appears solid, separate, permanent. The walls, the furniture, the device you're using to read this, your own hands, your own body, all of it presenting itself as dense, discrete, unchanging matter. But here's what they don't teach you in school, what most people live their entire lives without realizing. Matter is not what it appears to be. Quantum physicists discovered this over a century ago, and they've been quietly uncomfortable with the implications ever since. When you examine matter at its fundamental level, when you look closer and closer at what things are actually made of, something shocking emerges. There's nothing there, not emptiness in the way you might imagine it, but pure energy, vibrating at specific frequencies, creating the illusion of solidity through pattern and repetition. That table that appears so solid, it's 99.9999% empty space with subatomic particles moving so fast they create the impression of density. Your body that feels so real, so permanent, so undeniably you. It's the same. A temporary pattern of energy, constantly exchanging atoms with everything around it, completely replacing itself every few years, yet somehow maintaining the illusion of being a fixed, separate thing. But we're not taught to experience ourselves this way. We're taught to be the body, to protect it, to identify with its limitations, to believe that when it stops functioning, we cease to exist. This identification with matter is the root cause of every limitation you experience, not because matter is bad or wrong, but because it's not what you actually are. And when you mistake yourself for something you're not, you inherit all the limitations of that false identity. What happens when you look closer? I want you to try something right now. Look at your hand. Really look at it. Your immediate perception says, this is solid flesh, bone, skin. This is matter. This is real. Now consider what's actually happening. Your hand is made of cells, approximately 50 billion of them, all working in perfect coordination without your conscious effort. Those cells are made of molecules. Those molecules are made of atoms. Those atoms are made of subatomic particles that, when observed, behave more like waves of probability than discrete objects. The chair you're sitting on, the air you're breathing, the light entering your eyes, all of it is energy vibrating at different frequencies. The only reason your hand doesn't pass through the chair is because their electromagnetic fields repel each other, creating the sensation of contact, of solidity, of separation. But separation is the illusion. At the quantum level, everything is entangled, interconnected, part of the same unified field, expressing itself in infinite forms. You've probably heard this before. Energy, frequency, vibration, all the spiritual buzzwords that have been repeated so often they've lost their impact. But I'm not sharing this as philosophy or belief. I'm pointing you toward direct recognition of what you actually are beneath the story your mind tells about itself. Because something extraordinary happens the moment you shift your primary identity from matter to energy. Reality, which has been responding to you as if you were a fixed, limited, separate thing, suddenly has to reorganize itself around a completely different premise. The recognition that changes everything. 3 years ago, I was sitting in a doctor's office receiving test results that made no medical sense. 6 months earlier, I'd been diagnosed with a condition that typically takes years of treatment to improve, if it improves at all. The doctors had been clear. This would be a slow process requiring medication, lifestyle changes, and realistic expectations. But my most recent tests showed something impossible. Complete reversal, not improvement, reversal. As if the condition had never existed. The doctor kept saying, "I don't understand this. This doesn't happen." And I knew exactly why it happened, though I couldn't explain it in terms he would accept. Because 3 months before those tests, something fundamental had shifted in how I experienced myself. I'd been meditating, but not in the traditional sense. Not trying to quiet my mind or achieve some peaceful state. I'd been experimenting with perception itself, with the direct recognition of what I actually was beneath the layers of identity, story, and conditioning. And one morning it happened. Not through effort or technique, but through a sudden collapse of the entire structure I'd been calling myself. I was sitting quietly, and my awareness naturally deepened past thought, past sensation, past emotion, into something underneath all of that. And in that depth, there was no body. There was no separate self. There was only energy, moving, pulsing, vibrating, completely continuous with everything around it. It wasn't that my body disappeared. It was that the boundary I'd always experienced between my body and not my body dissolved. I could feel my physical form, but I could feel it the same way I could feel the air around me, the sounds in the room, the light coming through the window. All of it was one continuous energetic field, and I was that field, temporarily expressing itself as this particular form. The recognition lasted maybe 3 minutes before my thinking mind came back online and reconstituted the familiar sense of being a separate person. But those 3 minutes changed everything because I'd experienced directly what I actually was. Not believed it, not visualized it, not affirmed it. Experienced it. And from that moment, my body started changing in ways that defied medical explanation. Because the consciousness that had been operating it was no longer identifying with density, limitation, and fixed material form. The physics of identity shift. Let me explain what actually happens when you shift from identifying as matter to recognizing yourself as energy. And I mean the literal, measurable physics, not spiritual metaphor. Your body is constantly receiving instructions from your consciousness about how to organize itself. Every cell has receptors that respond to the electromagnetic signals your brain generates based on your thoughts, emotions, and most importantly, your fundamental sense of identity. When you identify as matter, as a fixed physical form with limitations inherited from genetics, past experience, and biological programming, your cells receive that information and organize accordingly. They express certain genes and suppress others. They age at certain rates. They respond to threats and opportunities in predictable patterns. This isn't conscious. You're not deliberately telling your cells how to behave. But your deepest sense of what you are broadcasts constantly, and your body listens. Researchers in epigenetics have discovered that gene expression can change dramatically based on perception, belief, and emotional state. Identical genetic code can produce completely different outcomes depending on the signals the cell receives from consciousness. But here's what they're only beginning to understand. The most powerful signal isn't what you think or believe about yourself. It's what you fundamentally identify as. When you identify as dense matter, you broadcast a frequency that reinforces density. Your cells organize around permanence, protection, and preservation of existing patterns. Change becomes slow, difficult, requiring tremendous effort. But when you recognize yourself as energy, something shifts at the most fundamental level. Your cells receive different instructions, not through will or intention, but through the natural reorganization that happens when consciousness recognizes its true nature. Suddenly, patterns that seemed fixed become fluid. Limitations that appeared permanent reveal themselves as temporary expressions of energy that can reorganize into different configurations. This isn't magic. This is physics that medical science is only beginning to understand because it requires acknowledging that consciousness is fundamental, not emergent, and that identity shapes biology more than biology shapes identity. What actually shifts in your daily experience? You're probably wondering what this looks like in practical terms, because recognizing yourself as energy sounds abstract, theoretical, disconnected from the mundane reality of paying bills and navigating relationships and dealing with whatever challenges currently occupy your life. But the shift is anything but abstract. It changes everything about how you move through reality, though not in the ways you might expect. The first thing you notice is that resistance dissolves, not because you develop some spiritual practice of non-resistance, but because resistance itself is a function of believing you're a separate, solid thing that reality happens to. When you identify as matter, you experience life as a series of impacts. Things happen to you. Circumstances press against you. People affect you. The world is full of threats and obstacles that your solid, vulnerable form must navigate carefully. But when you recognize yourself as energy, the fundamental dynamic changes. You're not a separate thing that life happens to. You're continuous with the same field that's producing all the circumstances and people and experiences you encounter. It's not that challenges disappear, it's that your relationship with them transforms. Instead of solid resistance meeting solid obstacle, there's fluidity, movement, natural reorganization around whatever's arising. People describe this as flow, but that word doesn't capture the actual physics of what's happening. You're literally experiencing reality from a different ontological position, not as separate from the field, but as the field temporarily focusing itself into your particular perspective. The second thing that shifts is the relationship with time. When you identify as matter, you inherit time's apparent linearity. Past shapes you through memory and conditioning. Future creates anxiety through anticipation and planning. Present moment is where you're trapped, trying to move from a past you want to escape toward a future you hope to reach. But energy doesn't experience time the way solid matter appears to. Energy exists in what physicists call non-local correlation. Everything interconnected across space and time simultaneously. When you recognize yourself as energy, you don't lose the ability to function in linear time, but you're no longer completely subject to it. Past patterns that seemed permanently etched into your identity reveal themselves as current energetic configurations that can shift. Future possibilities that seemed distant or impossible become present potentials you can feel and align with now. This is why spontaneous healing happens, why sudden life changes occur that seem impossible given historical patterns, why synchronicities multiply, not because you've learned to manipulate reality, but because you've stopped experiencing yourself as a fixed point in linear time and started experiencing yourself as energy that exists across multiple temporal dimensions simultaneously. The practical recognition process. I know what your thinking mind is doing right now. It's either dismissing all of this as too abstract, too spiritual, too disconnected from your actual life, or it's trying to figure out how to use this information, how to apply it. What technique will shift your identity from matter to energy? But both of those responses miss the point entirely, because recognition isn't something you do. It's something you allow, something you notice, something that's already true that you've been trained to overlook. You don't need to become energy. You already are energy. You just need to stop exclusively identifying with the dense material form that energy is temporarily expressing itself as. Let me guide you into direct recognition right now, not through belief or imagination, but through attention itself. Close your eyes if you're in a position where that's safe. If not, just soften your gaze and let your attention turn inward. Notice that you're aware. Don't think about awareness. Just notice that you're aware of reading these words, aware of your body, aware of sounds around you, aware of thoughts arising. Now notice that this awareness isn't located in any particular place. You might habitually feel like awareness is in your head, behind your eyes. But if you look for it directly, you can't actually find awareness anywhere specific. It's not an object. It's not located in space. This awareness is not produced by your brain. Your brain is something you're aware of through sensation and concept. But the awareness itself, that's not inside the matter of your body. The body is inside awareness, appearing as sensation, as image, as concept. Stay with this recognition. You are not the body you're aware of. You are the awareness the body appears in. Now notice the energy of being alive, not the concept of energy, the actual felt sense of aliveness in your system. There's a vibration, a movement, a current that's animating this form. You can feel it if you're still enough. That aliveness, that energy, that vibration, that's what you actually are, not the temporary form it's moving through, not the story your mind tells about that form, but the living energy itself. And notice that this energy isn't contained by your skin. The sensation you call my body is energy. The sensation you call air on my skin is energy. The sensation you call sounds around me is energy. All of it the same field vibrating at different frequencies, creating the appearance of separation, of inside and outside, of me and not me. But at the level of direct experience, before thought labels and divides everything, there's just energy, moving, vibrating, expressing itself in infinite forms, and you are that. Not you have that, you are that. Open your eyes. Notice that nothing has changed in your external circumstances, but something has shifted in your direct experience of what you are. That shift, however subtle, is the beginning of everything else changing. What your body knows that your mind denies. Your mind might be skeptical of everything I'm sharing. That's fine. The mind is designed to maintain familiar patterns, to protect the known self, to resist dissolution into something that feels threatening to its structure. But your body already knows this truth. Your body has always known it. Every time you've experienced chills during a powerful moment, that's your body recognizing energetic resonance. Every time you felt someone's presence before seeing them, that's your body reading energy before your mind processes matter. Every time you've had a gut feeling that proved accurate, that's your body accessing information through energetic connection, rather than material observation. Your body is an energy reading instrument far more sophisticated than anything science has developed. It can detect electromagnetic fields, subtle vibrations, quantum entanglement effects that your thinking mind dismisses as imagination or coincidence. But you've been taught to trust your thinking mind over your feeling body, to prioritize analysis over intuition, to believe the story about reality rather than the direct experience of reality. This is the conditioning that keeps you locked in matter identification. Because if you trusted your body's direct experience, you'd recognize immediately that the density you see is not what you feel, that the separation you perceive conceptually is not what you experience energetically. Children know this instinctively before they're taught otherwise. They experience their bodies as energy, fluid, changing, magical, unlimited by the rules matter supposedly follows. They imagine themselves as animals, as superheroes, as different ages, different forms, and their energy responds, their experience shifts, their bodies express capacities that adults insist aren't possible. Then they're taught, you are your body, this physical form, and it has specific limitations you must accept, and gradually their energy condenses into matter identification, and the fluidity disappears, and they become adults who've forgotten what they actually are. But the body never forgets. The energy never stops being energy. It just gets covered over by layers of conditioning, belief, and identification with the material surface. The moment reality reorganizes. Now I need to share something that will sound impossible unless you've experienced it directly. But since you're still reading, since something brought you this far, you're ready to hear it. The moment you genuinely recognize yourself as energy rather than matter, reality around you immediately begins reorganizing. Not gradually, not eventually, immediately. Because reality is not fixed, solid, separate from your consciousness. Reality is the quantum field collapsing into specific configurations based on observation, and the observer's fundamental identity determines what configurations become available to collapse into manifestation. When you observe reality as a separate material being, certain possibilities exist and others remain impossible. Physical laws appear fixed. Change requires time and effort. Circumstances have weight and momentum that resists alteration. But when you observe reality as energy recognizing itself through this temporary form, the entire framework shifts. Possibilities that were impossible under matter identification suddenly become available. Physical laws reveal themselves as statistical probabilities rather than absolute constraints. Change can happen instantaneously because you're no longer trying to rearrange solid matter. You're allowing energy to reorganize into different patterns. I've watched this happen in my own experience repeatedly since that initial recognition 3 years ago. Not through will or technique, but through natural reorganization that occurs when the observer's identity changes. Financial situations that seemed hopelessly stuck suddenly resolving through completely unexpected channels. Relationships that felt permanently damaged spontaneously healing without any conversation or effort. Health conditions reversing themselves in ways doctors call miraculous, but are simply energy returning to natural coherent patterns once limiting identity dissolves. The skeptical mind will always find alternate explanations. Coincidence, psychosomatic effects, confirmation bias, placebo response. And sure, you can interpret it that way if you need to maintain your matter identification. But direct experience tells a different story. When you recognize yourself as energy, reality recognizes you differently and responds accordingly. The people who already know this. You've probably encountered people who move through reality differently, not more successfully necessarily, not happier or more enlightened in any obvious way. But there's something about their presence that feels lighter, more fluid, as if they're not quite as dense as everyone else. These people don't talk about energy or consciousness or quantum physics. They might not have any spiritual practice or know anything about the concepts I'm sharing here, but they've somehow naturally maintained or rediscovered the recognition of themselves as energy rather than pure matter. Watch how they navigate challenges. There's no heavy resistance, no solid tension against what's happening. They flow around obstacles the way water flows around rocks, not through positive thinking or spiritual technique, but through the simple absence of the density that creates resistance. Watch how circumstances organize around them. Opportunities appear, resources materialize. The right people show up at the right time, not because they're lucky or favored by the universe, but because their energy field broadcasts coherence rather than density, and the quantum field responds to coherence by organizing supportive patterns. Watch how they hold their bodies. There's a relaxation that doesn't come from stress reduction techniques. Their forms express energy that's moving through rather than trapped inside. They don't look rigid, defended, protected. They look like energy temporarily shaped into human form. These people are proof that what I'm sharing isn't theory or philosophy. They're living demonstrations of what naturally happens when consciousness stops identifying exclusively with dense material form. And here's the interesting part. Most of them can't explain how they do it, because they're not doing anything. They're being what they actually are, and reality responds to that being with flow, ease, and synchronistic support. You can learn all the techniques, practices, and methods in the world, but if your fundamental identity remains matter rather than energy, those techniques will feel like trying to polish a stone into light. Effort, friction, limited results. But shift the identity itself. Recognize what you actually are beneath the conditioned layers, and everything else becomes natural expression rather than forced achievement. What happens next? I'm not going to tell you what to do with this recognition. Not because I'm withholding information, but because doing is the wrong approach entirely. You don't do energy identification. You relax into it. You allow it. You stop clinging so tightly to the matter story and notice what's already here underneath that story. Some of you are already feeling it as you read these words. A lightness, an opening, a sense of boundaries dissolving slightly. That's not imagination. That's your direct experience recognizing truth before your thinking mind can categorize and contain it. Others are still resisting, still locked in the skepticism that protects matter identification from threatening dissolution. That's fine too. The recognition happens when it happens, and forcing it just creates more density. But I'll tell you what naturally occurs as this recognition deepens, not as prediction, but as description of what simply unfolds when energy recognizes itself. Your relationship with fear transforms. Not because you overcome fear, but because fear itself is a product of believing you're a vulnerable, solid thing that can be damaged or destroyed. When you experience yourself as energy, as consciousness temporarily focused into form, but never limited to that form, fear loses its foundation. Your physical vitality increases without effort. The density that creates fatigue, that requires constant energy management and protection, dissolves. Energy flows through rather than getting trapped in matter patterns, and your body expresses that flow as natural vitality. Your manifestation speed accelerates dramatically, not because you've learned better techniques, but because you're no longer trying to rearrange solid matter through force of will. You're allowing energy to reorganize into configurations that match the frequency you're broadcasting, and energy reorganizes far faster than matter appears to. Your intuition becomes reliable, accurate, immediate, because you're receiving information through energetic resonance rather than filtering everything through mental analysis. The field speaks directly to the field, consciousness to consciousness, bypassing the limiting interface of matter identification. Most significantly, the existential anxiety that colors most human experience simply dissolves. Because that anxiety is rooted in the terror of being a separate, vulnerable material form in a threatening universe. But when you know yourself as energy, as consciousness itself, the entire premise of that anxiety reveals itself as false. You're not a separate thing that can be harmed. You're the field itself, temporarily experiencing itself through this particular form, absolutely safe, because you are the totality temporarily focused into individuality. The declaration that shifts everything. I want you to make a statement right now, not to me, not to the universe, but to yourself, to the deepest level of your own consciousness that's been waiting for this recognition. Say it internally or out loud if you're able. I am not this body. I am the energy animating it. I am not confined to matter. I am consciousness experiencing itself in form. I release identification with density and recognize my true nature as living energy, temporarily expressed but never limited. Feel what happens as you make that statement. Don't analyze it. Don't question whether you really believe it. Just notice what shifts, however subtly, in your direct experience of being alive right now. That shift, that small opening, is the beginning of everything I've described. Not the end, but the beginning. The first crack in the density that's been concealing your actual nature. You don't have to maintain this recognition constantly. That would just create a new form of trying. But once the crack appears, once you've had even a glimpse of what you actually are beneath the matter story, that recognition never completely leaves. It becomes a reference point you can return to, a depth you can drop into, a truth you can remember even when the surface of your experience gets caught in drama and density again. And each time you return to it, the recognition deepens, stabilizes, integrates more fully until it's no longer something you do or remember. It simply becomes how you experience being alive. The reality you've always wanted. Everything you've been chasing, every manifestation technique you've learned, every improvement you've sought, all of it has been motivated by one underlying desire: to feel free, fluid, unlimited, at ease in reality rather than struggling against it. You thought you needed to change your circumstances to feel that way. Get the relationship, the money, the health, the success, and then you'd finally feel the freedom and ease you're seeking. But circumstances were never the problem. Matter identification was the problem. The belief that you are a dense, limited, separate thing trying to survive and thrive in a threatening material world. That belief creates the struggle. That belief generates the resistance. That belief necessitates all the effort, control, and protection that exhausts you. Shift the identification itself. Recognize what you actually are, and the freedom you've been seeking through changed circumstances reveals itself as your natural state, already here, already available, simply covered over by the conditioned belief that you are matter rather than energy. Reality doesn't need to change for you to experience what you want. Your recognition of what you are needs to change, and then reality naturally reorganizes itself to reflect that new recognition. This is the secret that's been hidden in plain sight throughout all spiritual traditions, quantum physics, and direct mystical experience. Not hidden because someone was keeping it from you, but hidden because it cannot be grasped intellectually. It can only be recognized experientially, and that recognition is available right now. Not tomorrow after more preparation, not after you've healed your past or fixed your patterns or become more worthy. Right now, exactly as you are, because what you actually are has never been matter, has never been limited, has never needed improvement. The energy reading these words is the same energy expressing itself as these words. The consciousness aware of this moment is the consciousness creating this moment. You are not in reality. Reality is in you, appearing as your experience, because you are the field temporarily focused into observation. Welcome home to what you've always been. Welcome home to energy recognizing itself. Welcome home to the fluidity that's been waiting beneath the density you've been taught to believe you are. Everything changes from here. Not because you make it change, but because you've stopped believing in the solidity that made change feel so difficult. Reality bends not to your will, but to your recognition of what you actually are. And what you actually are is energy, consciousness, the living field itself, temporarily forgetting its nature so it can experience the joy of remembering. You're remembering now, and reality is already responding.